So welcoming us all to our Lunch and Learn, and today I am delighted to say that I have Ali with us, who is a naturopath. Ali is also a friend of mine, and I've known Ali for a long time. But in the last, well, Ali will tell you. Ali, why don't you tell us, first of all, what is a naturopath? And, oh, I think you're muted at the moment. Hang on, let's just take you off mute. Are you off mute? Hang on. You're still muted. Hang on. Unmute. There we go. So this is Ali. I'm going to ask Ali the question because I think I'm sure most of people will want to know what is a naturopath. And Ali, how did you come into the world of naturopathy?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's perhaps a term not so well known in the UK. It's very well known in America, Canada, Australia. I essentially practice nutrition, but a naturopath has had other training in other areas. And what normally happens is after you've done your training, you find a particular area that you want to focus on. And for me, it's nutrition, but nutrition is a big kind of umbrella term, really. I might run clinical tests within that. So I'm going to be looking at people's stress levels and anxiety levels and self-care within nutrition. So that's my main focus, and I actually practice something called functional medicine, which you may or may not have heard of. Again, it's a term that's perhaps becoming more well known, and it's really looking at the function of the body, how the body functions, rather than looking at the single area, say a single organ system. You're looking at a whole systems approach about how the body works and how it functions together, and then occasionally more often than occasionally, actually, I might run a clinical test. I might be looking at the gut, for example, as we're talking about that today. I might do a test looking at hormones. I might be looking at someone's stress response. So that helps me get a better understanding of the function of the body. And in terms of how I got into it, I think in many respects, I've probably always been a naturopath. I was that kind of ill kid. I was that listless child with tummy ache and eczema. And quite soon on, actually, my mum kind of realised that modern medicine didn't have all the answers. And from really the age of about 7 or 8, we were exploring different routes. There's a couple of therapists in my family, actually, and just kind of always practiced like this. I can remember even in primary school telling friends at school, perhaps, advice, and most definitely it just increased sort of throughout my life. So it's been a way of life for me for a very long time. But then I finally studied. I went back to university and I graduated in 2013 as a naturopath.
So today, thank you for that. So today we are here to talk about the gut. Now for me, when I think of the gut, I just think of a big fat belly, but obviously that is not what the gut is. So Ali, can you tell us a bit about the gut? And we're obviously going to talk about gut health in a bit more detail.
Sure. Well, the gut, yeah, we always think about when we talk about a full stomach, we think about our abdomen, really, don't we? But the stomach's much further up. It's kind of up towards the ribs. But the gut, the digestive system, it starts in your mouth and ends in your bottom. So it's huge. It involves the esophagus, the stomach, the small bowel, the large bowel, and actually indirectly the liver. And I always say to people that digestion actually starts outside of the body. It starts with sight. It's when you see a food, you start to salivate. We've all had that experience, and that saliva is actually digestive enzymes starting to work, and the smell as well. The smell of food helps get the digestive process started, really, with the enzymes. So perhaps in modern life, many of us have lost that. So we might quickly go and get a bite to eat on the run somewhere. We might not be cooking. We might be doing a very, very fast meal, so you've not got that experience where you're, like having a roast dinner, where you've got that smell permeating from the kitchen for a good couple of hours. So that is the start of digestion, really, sight and smell. But yes, it starts in the mouth and ends in the bottom, and it's a huge, great big organ system, which pretty much affects everything. We now know that it affects everything. Hippocrates, I don't know if any of you know who he is. He was the father of modern medicine 2,500 years ago. He actually said all disease begins in the gut, and it's only really relatively recently that we've caught up with that in terms of our understanding in modern medicine. And there's actually an updated version of that maxim. There's a Italian gastroenterologist who his way of looking at it. He says, your gut is not Las Vegas. What happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. So that's a really nice way of saying that all roads lead to the gut. You really need to be looking at your gut health for overall health.
So can you go into a bit more detail then about gut health? You know, where do we even begin with that? I mean, it must be, I mean, I'm sure we can't cover that in half an hour, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic. So when we're actually in our mother's womb, so when we're developing, our brain develops first, and then our bowel develops, and actually all organ systems develop from the bowel, which is a nice way of looking at why the gut is so important. So most of our immune system's in the gut. So somewhere between 70 to 80% of the immune system is in the gut. And people often say, well, why? I mean, yes, it is outside of the gut as well, but why is the immune system need to be in the gut and not elsewhere? It's because the gut is essentially outside of self, because we have these two holes. And I always use the analogy of an apple with a straw going through the middle. So that straw is inside the gut, but the straw has an end either side that's essentially open to the extremity. So that's like our gut, really. So obviously we've got food that comes into the digestive system, and it doesn't matter how organic or biodynamically grown that carrot may be, it's still foreign, it's not self. So the body needs to decide whether that's friend or foe. What might be one person's medicine might be another person's poison. So your immune system needs to decide whether that's okay to digest or to initiate an immune response. And that's quite a simple example. You think, okay, a carrot, you know, there's a lot of vitamin A there, it's really good for you. But then that carrot might have pesticides on it, or there may be a bacteria brought in with that carrot that doesn't agree with you. So pathogens, viruses, they come through the digestive system. And then obviously chemicals from food. So your immune system has to decide, and it's never takes a second off. So there's actually more immune reactions happening in your gut in one day than there are in the rest of your body, in the rest of your lifetime.
Wow.
Just think about that for a minute, and that's huge. So if we want to be thinking about our immune system, and I think, you know, with the current climate, we really do need to be thinking about supporting our gut health, primarily.
So one of the questions actually, which I think is probably quite worth asking now, is the gut linked to depression?
Most definitely. So I always use the term depression starts anywhere but the brain. I think in terms of, you know, kind of conventional ways of looking at depression, yes, they can be very helpful within an acute phase, but long term, I would always go back to someone's digestive system. So the gut actually has its second brain, known as the enteric system. It's about the size of a cat, and there are more, a cat brain, and there are more messages going from the gut to the brain than there are from the brain to the gut. Our gut makes about 24 different neurotransmitters. 90% of serotonin is made in your gut. So we think serotonin is purely a brain.
And serotonin is what's, Ali?
Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that affects mood primarily, so it makes us happy. It also helps digest our food, it helps us sleep. It has a number of different functions, but in terms of, sort of depression, yeah, it's really implicated with mood. So if someone's gut health is off balance or imbalanced in any way, then it's most definitely going to be affecting our mood. And a big part of that is something called a vagus nerve, which runs from the base of our brain down to our gut. And that's basically like a communication highway between the gut and the brain. And dysregulated bacteria in the gut is going to be creating crosstalk with this vagus nerve and kind of giving you anxiety signals that are going to manifest as perhaps an emotional response. If we want a happy, you know, outlook on life, then the gut is one of the places to look at, most definitely.
Okay, so I hope that helps, Suzanne. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to talk about sugar, because, and I say this because most of our members, you know, when most ladies that join us, they're here because they want to lose weight, and often they struggle because of the fact that they have a sweet tooth. And so I thought it would be really interesting to ask you a bit more about, you know, sugar intake and the impact it has on weight loss and also on our bodies, apart from making us fat.
So sugar is a tricky one. Firstly, I always like to say with sugar is it's not, you know, all your fault, you know, it's never your fault, but, you know, we are actually hardwired as human beings to seek out sweet foods. So in terms of our ancestors, something that was sweet in nature was generally safe, and something that was bitter was perhaps, you know, poisonous. So we are hardwired to seek out sugar. Every single brain receptor has a glucose receptor as well. So we do need an element of glucose in the form of carbohydrates, but not within the form of sugar. And many of us have different relationships with sugar for different reasons. So culturally and in times of celebration, we generally eat cake, you know, Christmas cake, birthday cake, sugar at Easter. Perhaps as young children, we were given sweets as rewards, or when we were unwell, or to cheer us up. You know, there's a big relationship there. But in terms of sugar and weight loss and gut health and what it's doing to the body, the sugar essentially is inflammatory. I don't know if any of you have heard of that term.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if actually that was going to be one of my questions, because I think everyone says, oh, it's inflammation, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what that actually is.
Yeah, so inflammation really we now know is at the root of all chronic health complaints. Even depression is inflammation of the brain. So where there's an immune response, there's an inflammatory response, and vice versa. So actually inflammation is there to heal and repair in the first instance. If we fell over and we hurt our ankle, it becomes inflamed because we want to immobilize that area and not use it. Inflammation is there for a reason. And when inflammation kicks in, then white blood cells come in to heal the area. But unfortunately, in some chronic health complaints, that inflammatory process doesn't turn off. So it's essentially, it's aging inflammation. It changes the tissue structure, and it may push you towards various different chronic health complaints. Inflammation in the gut, you're going to be affecting the gut integrity. You're going to be perhaps having an immune response when you don't really want an immune response. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Thing that you can do to keep inflammation on side, such as eating an anti-inflammatory diet, which is a very low processed sugar diet. I'm not talking about cutting all carbs out, bringing in omega-3 fats, so really great fats from fish, nuts, oils, seeds, avocados. They're really great anti-inflammatory foods. And in terms of what sugar can do on the gut, so in terms of our gut bacteria, it's a very simplistic way of, say, talking about good and bad bacteria. It's a lot more complex than that. But for argument's sake, the so-called bad guys, they proliferate, they increase via sugar. So their favorite food is sugar, and also poor quality fats. So if you've got a sweet tooth that perhaps you're having difficulty figuring out, then it may actually be that you have an imbalance in bacteria, because there's an argument that 80 to 90% of our food choices are actually dictated by our bacteria. So if you've got an imbalance in bacteria that's saying, I want some more food, I'm going to tell you to go for something sweet or a poor quality fat, then you might have this kind of war happening between this bacteria in your gut, but it will be definitely influencing your food choices, the integrity of your gut and the type of bacteria that's there.
Fascinating. If anyone's got any questions on that, just pop them in the chat box. So is your recommendation then to cut out sugar altogether to lose the weight? Because I think what I've noticed with some members is they're obviously making a lot of effort cutting out sugar, so they're having fruit only, but they're still struggling. And I think they're still, and I don't know whether it's a bit more complex than this, but there's things like they're having bread and there's the pasta, but they're not having huge portions of it, but it's still part of they're still trying to lose weight, but eating these sorts of foods. Is that going to be influencing the weight loss?
Yeah, most definitely. It's never about a one size fits all, unfortunately. You know, if it's brilliant when people, you know, they change their diet, they exercise and they lose weight. That's absolutely, you know, it's fantastic, and that can happen. But if there's something getting in the way and you feel that you're not getting the desired results, then there could be a number of different things happening. Yes, this imbalance in bacteria, even though you may have cut out sugar or you're having limited sugar, you may still have a type of bacteria that's very thrifty and it holds on to fat, and it's taking more energy from food than you'd actually like or want. There can be genetic influences where that's concerned as well. If you're eating a food that doesn't agree with you, you might have a food intolerance and not actually be aware of it. So the most frequent food intolerances are, I'm afraid, perhaps some of the stuff that we really like. So it's wheat, dairy, eggs, soy, peanuts. Those are kind of the usual suspects, and then sometimes some of the other nuts. Those are the ones I see most frequently. But they could be anything. But if you're having a food which you may not be aware of, that it disagrees with you, because the thing about food intolerances, they're different to allergies. So an allergy, you kind of know pretty quickly. You have a symptom, you have a response. But a food intolerance actually can be delayed by up to 72 hours. So if you're having a food that you perhaps shouldn't do, this is going to affect your bacteria, it's going to affect your immune system, it's going to affect the inflammation, and that can be a barrier to weight loss as well. I mean, it can be other things. It could be a hormone. It could be that you actually don't have enough energy in your body to burn fat. That's another consideration. And if that would be how I practice, I look at something called your mitochondria, which are your energy powerhouses in your cell. Maybe you need some work there to help you burn fat. But as we're talking about food and sugar, definitely it's the type of food. So gluten, Anna, you mentioned sort of pasta and bread. I'm not saying everyone has to have a gluten-free diet. I personally do, it suits me, but most certainly think about reducing it. If you're having wheat every day, and sometimes 3 times a day, it creeps in without you realizing that grain. It might be a wheat-based cereal. You might have a pasta later, or some wholemeal bread, or some crackers. It really does creep in, and it can be inflammatory for some people, which then has a negative effect on weight loss. And unfortunately, the gluten is actually a protein in bread, and it's changed in structure a lot since around about the 50s, when we had to make wheat and crops sustainable to feed the masses and to be able to survive transport, survive poor weather. So basically stand up to supply and demand. So that protein has become a lot more robust and therefore a lot more difficult for us to digest.
And so what with that, why does it become so difficult to digest? What is it in that protein that has that sort of negative impact on the body?
So all proteins are made up of a chain of amino acids. So an amino acid is an individual protein, and gluten is a very long, robust chain. And there's research to suggest that in everybody, absolutely everybody, your body initiates an immune response whenever it comes into contact with gluten, because it doesn't like the shape of it, and it's got to be really hard to break it down. But in some people, their immune system will initiate that immune response, and then it will kind of deal with it, and then you can have it. But in my own experience and in my practice, people can develop this sensitivity to gluten at any time, particularly if there may have been another stressor in their life. You know, they may have lost their job or had some relationship issues. If there's a stressor going on in your life and your body's got to kind of keep up with that, it may decide it doesn't want to have to deal with that gluten protein anymore, and you won't be able to process it as well. And unfortunately, the gluten protein, it does affect the integrity of the gut, the internal wall of the gut, and it can aggravate it and create inflammation. And then it can actually create something called leaky gut. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. So the proper term is gut permeability, whereby your tight junctions in your gut, you essentially have these junctions, and they are there to let through properly digested food and to keep out undigested food and bacteria, viruses, pathogens that you don't want going into your systemic system. But when those tight junctions get compromised, they go like that, and they start letting in things that shouldn't be there. And then the immune system's like, I don't recognize this. It's not in the form that I'm used to. I'm going to initiate immune response. and then there's the cascade of the inflammation and the toxins and the chemicals. So it's kind of it's a chain reaction essentially that happens in some individuals.
Wow, that's quite scary. I know, because I know my niece has got, I can't remember what it's called. What's the gluten? Celiac. She's celiac, so she has that problem. So that's really helpful. Lots of questions are coming in. I will come to them, ladies. I'm just going to just one other question. Well, I'd like to ask you around intermittent fasting, because I know that you work in retreats. And in Malta and in Somerset, and one of the things that you do, part of the treatments that you give, are around intermittent fasting, and it's something that has been talked amongst our group, and I know it's something I do every now and again, but again, you have far more knowledge than I do about it and the effect it has on the gut.
Mm-hmm. So primarily when we fast, and there's no really right or wrong way to fast, it's a very, very individual process. Some people aren't suited to fasting at all. They have a very different type of constitution. So a fast, we are naturally designed to fast. So our morning meal is called breakfast for a reason, because we have this overnight fast. So our ancestors, they fasted in the truest sense, it was sometimes famine or feast. And there's different ways of fasting. You could extend your overnight fast, which is something that I practice. So I'll have a later breakfast and try and have an earlier supper, and then not snack in the evening. So essentially, when you're fasting, you're not requiring your gut to do any work. So the most simple thing to get from fasting is that you push your body into repair mode, rather than having to worry about digesting that food. And naturally, we have something called a migrating motor complex that goes through our body. It starts from our stomach right through to the bottom of our bowel, and it works about every 2 to 3 hours. You've got this electrical wave that's happening, and it's happening there to basically get rid of any undigested food. It's like a sweeping mechanism, a big kind of house brush that goes through undigested food, bacteria, virus. It's your body's housekeeping essentially. But if you're snacking, if you're eating, really regular small meals, and sometimes people have to do that for various health complaints, but I would never keep them on that. But if you're snacking, if you're a grazer, and then you're perhaps having your evening meal, and then you're having a snack before you go to bed, you're stunting that migrating motor complex. Obviously at night, it's great for this complex. It really upregulates. But in the daytime, if there's this constant drip of food, then you're stunting that natural process of the migrating motor complex. And in terms of weight loss and fasting, again, I've had some fantastic results in clinic by just changing someone's breakfast time and evening time. There's something called the 8-16, where you eat your food within an 8-hour window. It's not about calorie counting or reducing food. I don't necessarily work like that at all, but you're extending your overnight fast. Me personally, I do a 10-hour window. That's too short a time for me most of the days. But in terms of weight loss, you're starting to balance your insulin levels. And when you balance your insulin levels, you then have a positive effect on hunger pangs. So you may find that you're not as hungry as you used to be, so you won't eat as much. So as far as weight loss is concerned, that's a real positive. And also because you've upregulated your body's internal housekeeping, essentially you may be, or you will be, addressing your gut bacteria as well, having a positive effect on that. And perhaps, bringing in the good guys and sweeping out the bad guys with this migrating motor complex.
Yeah, and I think when you start fasting, initially it's quite difficult because it's your brain wanting to just like, where's the food? But actually, if you allow your body to just let it pass, it works really well. But one thing, when you are fasting, what would you recommend in terms of liquid to have? Is it just stick with water or?
No, so I would never do. I do put people through water fast, so the retreat I work with, but that's on a very, very case-by-case basis, and they really need to be robust enough to manage that. I wouldn't necessarily advocate someone water fasted at home. It can sometimes be too much of a stress on your body, because fasting is actually a stress on the body. So fasting can be anything from, say, water or 2-3 juices a day. It can be soups and smoothies as well. Some people need more energy. So anything that's liquid, so even though there's more energy in a soup and a smoothie compared to a juice, that energy there, that fibre there has been pre-digested. So it's easier to digest. So therefore your gut doesn't need to do as much work. So really, in terms of what someone might need across a day, it's on a very case-by-case basis. You don't want to ever be feeling shaky, you know, and particularly if you're someone that has low blood pressure. I would say, when I've taken clients at the retreat, if they've got particularly low blood pressure, I would never put them on a straight juice fast. I would have some smoothie in there or some soup. You're going to get more energy perhaps from having root vegetables in a juice than you would a pure green juice. There's less energy in there. There's kind of stages, and it really would depend on the individual, but it's always about being kind and compassionate to yourself. It's never a competition, and it's about how you feel. I would never want you to feel shaky or you know, headachy, or like you have low blood pressure. It really does depend on the individual. But just taking out the need for the body to chew, the gut to chew and digest, you're essentially doing a type of a fast.
So would you, so if we were doing the 16-8, you see, normally if I did 16-8, I do 8-hour window where I would have maybe 2 meals and a snack, and then I would go for 16 hours and not have anything other than water or herbal teas and things like that. Are you suggesting in that 16-hour window you would have juices?
No, because your 16-hour, a lot of that you're going to be asleep.
Yeah.
So say you had a breakfast at 10 in the morning, and then you finished all your daily eating by 6. So that's an achievable 8-hour window, depending on what demands you have. You know, if you're a really busy mum and you're up really early in the morning, then maybe I would suggest that 10 in the morning is too late. I don't know. It just depends. People's digestive systems wake up at different speeds. But yeah, in answer to your question, Anna, yes, definitely. If you cut off at 6 o'clock, then you would have water or herbal teas. So nothing with milk in it. You'd have water or herbal teas until when you broke your fast the next morning.
Okay, brilliant. So I have got a question which I think is quite interesting. I've got, how would you start looking at someone's gut problem if they have already cut out common trigger or problem foods? So what would you do as a naturopath, Ali? What would you do?
A good question, and I actually find it when people come to see me in my practice, often they have figured out what foods don't work for them, or they've already eating, for want of another word, a pretty clean diet, and it makes my life a lot easier because we don't have to do that first. But if they're still experiencing problems, I'd always like to remind people that it's not about demonizing a food. You know, primarily, yes, there are foods that we know that, you know, we shouldn't have a lot of or should only have occasionally. It's not actually the food's fault. It's about reversing that and thinking what's going on inside the host as to why I can no longer tolerate tomatoes, for instance. Many of us can't tolerate tomatoes. It's what's going on in me as to why I can't do that. So if you'd already explored the trigger foods and you've done a lot of effort, but you're still having an issue, then I probably would encourage you to have a stool test.
Test being?
So a stool test is the tests I have access to are a lot more advanced than what you'd get with your doctor. You know, they may not even suggest you have one anyway. The stool tests that I run in my practice, the sample actually goes to a lab in America. So it's the same labs that functional medicine doctors use. And from that stool test, you're able to see their balance of bacteria. So the so-called good and bad. If there's a lot of overgrown yeast there, if they have any parasites, how well they're digesting their food. Do they need help with digestive enzymes? Is there any inflammation there? How well their gut's immune system's working? So you can get so much from a stool test. I don't always test, it depends on people's budgets. You know, there are tried and tested protocols that I would put into place, and they would involve supplements, you know, quite a few supplements. Depending on how someone presents, I might do an antimicrobial program, a natural antimicrobial program, or I may just say, okay, let's start you off with some really good quality digestive enzymes and look at your stomach acid. Is the stomach acid pH low enough? But often it's not. So there's different things that we can explore, but it's unusual if there is a long-standing gut complaint to be able to heal it directly just from food. You know, there's a process that you need to go through as well.
A whole lot of work that needs to go on.
Yeah,
so, another question, how do you balance the bacteria in your gut?
You can initially, you know, I would always start with food first. I'm never going to just give someone a load of supplements and not look at their food. So you can actually change your gut bacteria within 48 hours of making more, you know, healthful choices. Just by introducing an apple a day rather than having a biscuit or a muffin a day, you're immediately having a positive effect on your gut bacteria. You can introduce things like fermented foods. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of these or experimented with these. So these can be things like kombucha, which you make from a kind of a bacteria, a yeast starter kit. You have kefir, again, it's promoting natural bacteria in your gut. Sauerkraut, kimchi, I don't know if any of you have heard of any of these things, but it's naturally supporting your gut bacteria. They're not great for everyone. If you are going to explore those, I'd say go low and slow, because if there is an imbalance of bacteria, sometimes putting in these natural foods to feed your bacteria actually isn't the right thing to do, because it can make the situation worse. So it's a very case-by-case basis. Vegetables. Our gut absolutely loves vegetables. So we've got our gut bacteria, and I'm sure many of you have heard of probiotics as well. So if you were to take a probiotic, it would actually be pointless taking it if you ate very little vegetables, because the fibre in those vegetables is food for the probiotic and our gut bacteria. Again, it was Hippocrates that shined the light on the importance of fibre 2,500 years ago. And we can see the changes or the difference in our gut to tribal communities that still exist today. If you look at their stool samples, they're so much more diverse than ours, because primarily they have a lot more fibre there, and also they've not been exposed to perhaps everyday illnesses that we have. But most definitely it's vegetables. So our gut likes at least 20 different types across 1 week, a variety of different vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. So when I first read that, I was thinking, God, do I get 20? But actually it's not that difficult, because you can include onions, ginger, garlic in that, fresh herbs. And I always talk about vegetables and fruits rather than fruits and vegetables, because the focus should always be on vegetables. I'm not saying no one should have fruit. There's some incredible antioxidants in fruit. But really, you don't need more than about 2 pieces of fruit a day. You know, the focus should be on veg. So that's one of the easiest things to do. I've got actually the optimum number across 1 week is actually 40. So I'd encourage you, when you go shopping, to just pick something off the shelf that you've never tried before. So I have clients that come to see me and I'm like, yeah, but I eat so much broccoli, I eat so much carrots. I think, brilliant. But what about all the other vegetables that you could be having, and some of the fruits? You're denying your gut bacteria an opportunity to experience all these different raw materials, essentially, which is coming from vegetables and fruits. But if any of you are on a particularly low veg fruit diet, I would just increase that slowly, because a sudden influx of all this wonderful new fibre, your bacteria is like we're going, hey, hold on a minute, what's going on? I can't process all this, and you may get bloating or constipation or wind, and obviously I wouldn't want that. So do it slowly,
It's one of the things I do say to all the ladies is get your veg in, absolutely, 100%, so important. And it's amazing how easy it is to put a bit of coleslaw on your plate, for example, and think that's your veg for the day. And you're like, no. That's definitely, and I always say at least half your plate should be filled with vegetables before you put your protein and your carbs down.
Yeah, I would say 50%. Always try and go for 50% of brightly coloured vegetables. You know, eat a rainbow, because each colour is offering you something different.
Brilliant. Good. I'm glad you've said that. That's from the expert, everyone. Now listen to Ali. All right, I've got an interesting question. I suspect this won't be something you can answer in too much detail, but could one perhaps improve psoriasis by changing diet and or testing for issues? I am a sufferer now for 7 years, but despite removing sugar and alcohol, it's still bad. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Skin complaints are horrid. You know, I have a history of eczema. Thankfully, I don't really have it anymore, but it's really, really horrid. Yes, you can definitely make dietary changes. So psoriasis is an autoimmune condition, as you know. So there are certain protocols in terms of treating an autoimmune condition, and definitely looking at the gut would support that as well. Again, it's on an individual process basis, but well done on taking out the sugar and the alcohol. That will definitely be having a positive effect. Skin is complex. It's a very, very complex thing. People have a skin condition for different reasons. It may actually be viral. But yes, there are definitely more things you could do other than taking out sugar and alcohol, but well done for doing that.
Well, would you normally in a situation like that do a stool test, Ali? Is that what
I might do a stool test, yeah. I might look at the grain consumption, whether there's any room for movement there. That grains and nuts and seeds, and actually a lot of the plant kingdom have something called lectins in it, which is a protein, and essentially the plant kingdom's immune system. They don't want to be eaten, and we can actually struggle to break that down, and in some autoimmune cases you may need to look at that. But most definitely, yes, a stool test would definitely be worth doing. I might start off first of all adding in a few supplements before the stool test, but then if that didn't improve, we could look at running further tests.
Okay. So would you recommend taking digestive enzymes?
I would, yeah. So as we age, our digestive system does, slow down. So we have digestive enzymes are amylase for carbohydrates, protease for protein, and lipase for fats. And often some of the digestive complaints someone might be experiencing is because these digestive enzymes are depleted in some way. The pancreas isn't producing them as well as they should be. And particularly with common foods such as wheat and dairy, they can be quite tough on the gut. So having a digestive enzyme, it would really help towards that.
I mean, what is a digester? Is it like a tablet, or how does a digestive enzyme?
Yeah, it's normally just in a supplement, and it will be a combination of the ones that I've just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay. And again, I think you actually have your own sort of supplements yourself, don't you, that you sell?
I don't have my own brand of supplements. No, I have my own brand of tea, but I don't have my own brand.
Your own recommendations.
Yeah, my own recommendations. It's all about, it's what you get, really, in it, you get what you pay for. And unfortunately, I don't want to be brand bashing here, but a lot of the brands, say in Holland and Barrett or say Boots, they're not really going to be, it's about absorbability. So overall, the term, I'm sure you've all heard of "we are what we eat." That's actually kind of a partial truth. It's we are what we digest. It's how well our digestive system is working, and the same is true of those supplements. So there's a few brands that I use and that I trust, and I kind of stick to those and do a lot of research around the brand. It's always about the product, really, because
yes.
they differ wildly. They really do.
And it's quality, not
exactly
how cheap the product is. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe all the marketing. So we're almost coming to the end now. Just one last question, unless anyone's got anything they want to add. Any thoughts on FODMAP foods? I had to cut out apples and it made a difference.
Yeah, so FODMAPs are a type of carbohydrate that some of us struggle with. They can ferment in the gut. So it's actually a FODMAP protocol is actually something used a lot by dietitians in outpatient clinics for people with IBS or other gastro complaints. Yes, I do use it in my practice. I've actually got a client on it at the moment. It's kind of a sticky plaster, really, because we don't want you to have symptoms. And the symptoms can go because you've excluded certain foods, but it's not really getting to the root cause of the complaint. And I would never want to exclude and limit your fibre intake long term for the reasons I just discussed. So definitely it's something that I would explore, putting someone on a FODMAP diet whilst we do some other investigation as to what might be happening. It's something that's commonly used with IBS. So IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome. That's not telling you why you have it. It's just a name. So I read a paper recently actually that said, does IBS even exist? Because it's simply a symptom of something else going on in the body. It might be something called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So as that sounds, that's an imbalance in bacteria in the small intestine, and actually foods containing FODMAPs like apples or avocados can aggravate those bacteria, and then you get gas from that bacteria, either methane or hydrogen, and it's giving you those symptoms. So taking the FODMAPs out, you're not going to get that gas, but you're still not addressing that imbalance of bacteria. So definitely it's something that I would explore with a client, but not long term. And again, it's one of those case by case basis. It would depend on the person's case history and as to why they can't tolerate those foods.
I think that's probably answered the final question I was going to ask, because one member who's not here today had said that she has IBS and she has cider vinegar every day, but obviously still struggles and was sort of wanted recommendations around food. But it sounds to me like it's on an individual basis.
Definitely, yeah. As much as I love cider vinegar, it would depend on the cider vinegar as well. There's always a clause, and it might not be the right thing for that your member to do. So it's a tricky one to say you need to do X, Y, and Z, because that's not what functional medicine is about. It's about looking at the individual and the function of their body.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left. Any recommendations on treating, well, I'm not sure about this one, treating an underactive thyroid?
Oh, well, thyroid is actually a massive interest of mine. I could give you lots of recommendations, but I would need to speak to you, really, I'm afraid.
I did think that. Yeah. I think that that could be a whole different lunch and learn on that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. The thyroid actually is secondary. It's generally secondary to something else going on in the body. It's not the primary. If your thyroid is here, it's not the primary complaint. There's something in the body that's affecting the thyroid. Primarily viruses affect thyroid function, and this is something that's hopefully modern medicine will get hold of eventually, but in my opinion it's viruses, and then liver health, then gut health, in that order.
Brilliant. Ali, I think I can say on behalf of all the WAFers here, that was absolutely fascinating. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm now thinking, oh, maybe I need a stool test. But I always I know where my weaknesses are, but I found that really interesting. Thank you so much, and I think everybody can give a little sort of, I'll clap on behalf. You can see everyone's clapping for you. Thank you so much, Ali.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Stay on
Thanks,
the
Ali.
line a second.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Your WAFer ring.
Bye.
Thank you.